right, so the parable of a mustard seed. Here you have one, obviously, with you. You can see how incredibly tiny it really is. The parable of a mustard seed, Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to a mustard seed. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, it grows to the largest of plants. Sometimes it's described as a tree that provides shelter for birds, and this illustrates how the kingdom of God, or the Christian faith, starts from a tiny, humble beginning, but can grow into a vast, widespread, influential movement. The faith of a mustard seed is a biblical concept from Jesus' teaching that you can find actually in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's one of the ones that you can find actually in 3 of the Gospels. Meaning that even a tiny amount of genuine belief can produce incredibly powerful results, like moving mountains, uprooting trees, symbolizing that great things grow from small beginnings through God's power. Not human strength. It is encouragement that faith does not need to be large to be effective. It just has to be real. You have to have real faith. It has to be directed toward God, allowing the unseen, or sometimes really small, to achieve the impossible. I struggle with my own faith a lot. Sometimes, but it takes only a tiny measure of faith and often incredible obedience in God to show what amazing and powerful things He can do. One of the things that Cheryl and I have experienced in our lives is how it takes very little faith, but a lot of obedience. A lot of obedience. Because there have been times where I admit my faith kind of looks like this. But we have stepped out. We have trusted in Him. And it has been amazing, the things that He has done in our lives. Amazing. There have been times in my own life that I would not be standing here, physically standing here, if not for faith of other people. One time specifically, and Cheryl actually saw this incident actually happen, I actually had a really severe car wreck when I was in my very early 20s. It was substantial. I actually rolled my car down a ravine. And if not for the faith of my family coming out of a coma, it is very possible I never would have. Because they told my family she may never come out of a coma. My grandmother, being the person that she was and believing the way that she did, she stood on her faith. And she pulled all of her prayer circle together. And they stood and believed that I would not stay in a coma. That in fact, I was going to walk again, talk again, and do all of the things that the doctor said I may never do. And in fact, I woke up the very next day, proving that sometimes all it takes is just a little faith of one person. The faith of just one person, and the obedience sometimes of just one person. The story of Elijah and the woman with oil, the widow also called the widow of Zarephath, is a biblical account in 1 Kings 17, verses 18 through 16. Shows incredible faith and obedience of one woman. During a widespread drought in the land of Israel, God commanded the prophet Elijah to go down to the town of Zarephath in the region of Sidon. God promised that a widow would be there to provide him food, which during a drought was very impossible. There was not a lot of food. There was not a lot of anything to be true. Upon arriving in the town, Elijah saw a woman gathering sticks, and he asked her for a little water and a piece of bread. The woman replied that she had no bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a small amount of oil in a jug. And she explained that she was gathering sticks to prepare her last meal for herself and her son, because they were expected to die. Elijah told her, "Do not be afraid." He instructed her to go and make a small loaf of bread for himself, and then for her and her son. He gave her a message from the Lord. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day of the Lord sends rain on all the land. And she believed. She stood on this belief that God would do exactly as Elijah is instructing. So she does exactly what she's told. Demonstrating great faith, the widow did as Elijah instructed, and from that day on, she and her son and Elijah had enough food to eat every day. The flour and the oil miraculously never ran out, as God had promised. Now, this amazes me to stop and think that flour just appeared and oil just appeared every single day, because this woman believed that what Elijah said was true. So she was preparing her last meal for she and her son because she knew they were going to die. And so she believed this random guy, this prophet, who she had never met before, when he comes to her and he said, "The Lord has sent me," she believed him. I don't know that I have that much faith. I question sometimes if I would have that much faith that some random guy would come up to me and say, "Hey, by the way, I want you to make me this loaf of bread. And I promise that even though you're starving to death, and that's going to be your last loaf that you're ever going to have, I promise that your food is never going to run out." But then again, I remember a specific time in mine and Cheryl's life where we had no groceries in the house. None. And no money to buy them with. And we remembered that once upon a time, a long time ago, Brandis had given us a stereo and said, just whenever you have time, just return it. You know, y'all don't need it, we don't need it, I don't need it, just return it. And so we just randomly remembered it, and we found it, and we took it back to Walmart, and strangely enough, they took it back and gave us the full price for it and gave us a gift card. And we went into Walmart and bought enough groceries to last us until I got paid again. And usually Walmart doesn't take things like that. They typically don't give you full price for everything. And we were able to buy enough groceries to last us, because, you know, teachers don't get paid that often, and let's be realistic, they don't get paid very much. We were able to buy enough groceries to last us until I got paid the following month, because something had happened that month and we had no money. And there was not going to be money until the next month. And she prayed. And God was like, literally says, "Do you remember this thing sitting in the back of your closet that Brandis gave you? It's there. Just use it. It's there. Just use it." We expected to go in and maybe get like $50 for it, and that would be just enough to get us a little bit of food to last us for a little while. And instead, we got full price for it and a whole house full of groceries. And that is just one example of how many times God has taken care of us in our lives. Just one example. Proving that it may not have been a random guy telling us that our flour's not going to go out and our oil is not going to dry up. But it was a random stereo sitting in the back of our closet. Faith demonstrated through action and obedience is the most significant lesson this widow was able to believe that in the facing scarcity, she was able to follow Elijah's instructions. Through complete and total illogical, it was not logical, completely illogical instincts, she followed exactly what he told her to do. She was obedient. Faith often requires promise over personal circumstances. The widow was facing imminent starvation and a seemingly impossible request. Her decision to trust the prophet's word that the flour and the oil would not run dry. She trusted him, exemplifying that the trust in God would provide and would supply provision in a very dire situation. Giving generously even when you have little. This is something that is very difficult for me. Tithing. Giving is something that is very hard for me, and I admit that because sometimes it's just not there. And it's hard to tithe when you know the money's just not there. You're sitting there and you're looking at your bank account, and you're like, how am I supposed to give 10% when I have 1% to give? But a story was told to us one time, actually not even that long ago, by a very close friend of ours, specifically about tithing. And it was one of those stories where you wouldn't believe it if you didn't know the couple. And they were saying that one of them totally did not believe in tithing at all. And the other one was like, babe, I promise if we tithe, I promise God is going to supply every one of our needs. And they tithed. And she said the money wasn't there. But they tithed. And their bank account never changed. The bills came out, and the amount never changed. The money stayed there. And the tithes was taken out. And they said their bank account stayed full, miraculously stayed full the whole time. And proving that God will truly supply every one of your needs. We have had times where money just appeared out of nowhere. We've had checks appear in the mail from places. We've had refunds from doctor's offices before where we have overpaid places that we've not even written checks to. Proving that God can supply, even in the most unusual, illogical circumstances, as long as we are faithful and obedient. God's provision is sufficient and specific to our needs, not other people's needs, but our needs. The miracle wasn't sudden abundance of wealth. It was a daily supply that lasted until the Lord will send rain. This teaches us that God provides what we need when we need it. His grace is sufficient. Stop and consider the Israelites wandered around this same mountain for 40 years. And their shoes never wore out. Their clothes never wore out. Nothing ever happened. They were there. God supplied for them every single solitary day. Stop and think, my shoes wear out after 3 months and I have to buy new ones. I could not imagine in the amount of 40 years my shoes still being brand new and still fitting and never wearing out. But they never did because he supplied their needs every single day. Faith can be a stepping stone to deeper spiritual understanding. When her son, later in this, which I'm not really going to talk about this part of the story, but later her son dies. And Elijah lays over his bones, lays over his body, and prays for him, and he just is miraculously restored to life. When her son died and Elijah resurrects him, the widow declares, "Now that I know you are a man of God and the word of the Lord from your mouth is true." Her initial act of faith prepared her for a more profound revelation. So this initial act of faith of just believing that the flour is going to reappear and the oil is going to continue prepared her for what was going to happen. So I believe that there are times that little pieces of faith, little bits of faith, little amounts of believing that it's going to happen can prepare you for bigger things. Faith transcends boundaries. God's grace is for all people. All people. I don't think he says, because you are this, you will have my grace and my faithfulness. Because you are this. I think he says it's for all people. For everyone. The woman was a Gentile. She was not a Jew. She was a Gentile, living outside of Israel, yet God chose her. Ultimately, her story is an enduring reminder that faith and being faithful involves radical trust, immediate obedience, and generous giving in very illogical circumstances. I say that to say that illogical circumstances. I remember one time specifically, we were living in an apartment and it was flooding from not one place but 3 places. We had a hole in our living room that had flooded and wet carpet. We had a hole in our bathroom ceiling, and it had rained down through our mirror and come out from underneath the vanity, and all the toilet paper got soaking wet. And the wall was soaking wet, and the mirror was bubbled up off the wall. And then we had a hole above the bathtub because they flooded the bathtub from the little girls that lived above, let it overrun. So we had a hole above the bathtub. And Cheryl was in the living room and crying. Not a little, it was ugly tears. It was ugly tears. I was angry and frustrated, and she was crying ugly tears. And she looks up at the ceiling and she says, God, we can't take any more. We've had enough. We're done. We can't do this anymore. Please, God, please do something. We're trusting in you to provide for us. We've lived here. We've done everything. We were faithful. We had done everything. We had been going to church. We were doing all the right things, you know? And we were stuck in this apartment with holes in the wall, holes in the ceiling, wet, flooded carpet, and nothing was happening. Our prayers were being unanswered. We got a phone call from a friend of ours who knew the circumstances and situation that we were going through, who just happened to have been a real estate agent. And he said, hey girls, I have really great news for you. This guy that I know is flipping a house and he can't sell it. You want to go look at it? And we were like, sure, we'll go look at it. Why not? What can we lose? We can't lose anything. I mean, at this point, we're miserable. Like, we're living in mold. I mean, come on. So we go look at the house. We go talk to the guy. Now it's out in the middle of nowhere. Out in the middle of nowhere. And the guy was like, look, girls, you know, I've heard the situation that you're going through, and I want to help you. He lets us live there for 3 months rent-free. Completely rent-free for 3 months. While we work out all the circumstances of getting it, you know, approved and going through everything, because we had the pre-approval. It was just dealing with the financial part of moving into the house. And he was like, you're pre-approved, so the hard part's done. Let's just deal with everything else. So we were like, are you serious? Are you serious? And he was like, I trust you. He said, I trust Gary. And Gary trusts you, so I trust you. So, yes. So he lets us live there for 3 months rent-free. So we were like, okay. So we were able to become financially stable for the first time in ever. And we had a house to live in the middle of nowhere, with some really weird but great neighbors. And all we had to do was say, God, we surrender. We can't do this anymore. We can't do this on our own. Our works are not good enough. My works are never going to be good enough. I'm giving it all to you. how much faith I have. God, this is all I got. This is all I got. Like I don't have anything else to give. I'm done. I'm done, God. Ugly tears. And he showed up and showed out once again in our lives, proving that sometimes all it takes is just a little faith and a lot of obedience. Another example of Elijah's predecessor, Elisha, is another woman with oil. Is a powerful account of divine intervention. Again, we had pretty significant divine intervention in our lives. It's found in 2 Kings. It's a message of hope and God's miraculous ability to provide during a time of very financial desperation, which I think we were walking through that at the time. It's pretty financial desperation. A woman whose husband had just died cries out to Elisha, the prophet, "My husband has died. The creditors are coming after me," which I think some of us have probably had at some point in our lives. I've had to cry out and say, "The creditors are coming after me. Please, God help." They were taking her sons as collateral, and they were going to use them as slaves. As permitted by law at the time, it was completely legal at the time to take children as slaves to pay for a debt. Elisha asked the woman, "Tell me, what do you have in your house?" And the woman replied, "I have nothing but a small jar of olive oil." Elisha gives her very specific instructions. He said, "Go and borrow as many empty jars of oil as you as many empty jars as you can from your neighbors. Once inside the house, shut the door, with only yourself and your sons present. Begin to pour this small jar of oil that you have into all the empty containers. Miraculously, each one filled. Take all of those and sell them, and keep those some for yourself." She was able to pay all of her debts, and have excess for herself and her sons. This is just another example of faith. Trusting in God's provision when the circumstances feel hopeless, and acting again in obedience. The widow was in a dire situation, grieving the loss of her husband, facing imminent enslavement of her children over a debt. And yet, all she did was cry out in faith, and the situation was completely resolved. She was able to pay her debt and have left over. However, it seemed really meager at the time. It was just a small jar of oil, and yet there was enough to pay off all of her debt and still have excess for she and her family. He gave her specific instructions. How many times have you been given specific instructions and you were willing to follow them? Cheryl has told this story a lot, but I'm going to tell it again because I think it's comical that she prayed over wanting the Angel Network to work on our TV. Brandis gave it to us for Mother's Day, and it had worked, and then it didn't work. And so she was pretty upset. I think that would be a great way to describe pretty upset. That it wasn't working because she wanted to watch this TV show, and so she was upset that she couldn't watch it. So she prays, because it says ask for everything. So why not ask for the Angel Network to work? You might as well. Worst that can happen is he doesn't help you. And he gives her specific instructions as to what to do to fix it. And strangely enough, we have the Angel Network on our TV now. So sometimes just following directions, exactly as he provides, can show your incredible obedience to him. So these are all just simple examples of faith and obedience in God. I know that in our lives, there have been so many times that we have had nothing but faith and nothing but obedience. And we had no choice but to be faithful. Otherwise, we would have been completely without. A lot. A whole lot. There have been times we've had cars given to us. Just because we were faithful. And I feel like all it took was a little bit of faith. Sometimes she had a lot more faith than I did. She had to have faith for both of us. So, in short, faith is placing trust in God's direction, acting obediently with the resources you have. Sometimes this is all the resource you got. We open the door for God to perform the miracle, oftentimes when it defies complete and all human logic. Because there are times He does things that are completely beyond human logic. Completely beyond human logic. Getting phone calls. That was completely illogical. Getting checks in the mail from doctor's offices we've never been to. Completely illogical. And so He proves time and time again. All it took was a little faith. Like I said, sometimes her faith, not mine. And a lot of obedience to show He can show up and show out on so many occasions in our lives. All we have to do is just ask. And sometimes asking is the hard part.